Welcome to the Invested Dads Podcast, simplifying financial topics so that you can take action and make your financial situation better. Helping you to understand the current world of financial planning and investments, here are your hosts, Josh Robb and Austin Wilson.
Oh, we are recording.
I got you recording. We can go ahead and clap us in there.
Here we go. All right. Hey. Welcome back to the Invested Dads Podcast, a podcast where we take you on a journey to better your financial future. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's going to bring us back to our college selves, and that is video games.
Yeah, this is great because I was actually thinking about we need to do this topic. I was thinking about that a while ago.
Yeah, it's something that it's a huge part of, a lot of people's lives, and it's actually a growing part of companies' businesses. So I think this is something that we should definitely talk about and kind of talk about, the history of video games, talk about investing in video games, talking about, kind of the video game economy and stuff like that. So yeah, you were thinking about this recently?
Yeah, it must have been about a fortnight ago.
Oh, stop. Okay, so Fortnite, right? It's the
Yes.
biggest video game in the world.
Big game.
Probably. I have never played it, ever.
That's because you're all Apple, and Apple kicked them out.
Well, they got to get their 30% cut. No, but I've seen it like on the news or whatever, like little clips of it, but it just I've never really had the desire. Like I have an Xbox. I've never had the desire to play Fortnite. I don't know.
It's funny because
I don't get out much, Josh.
Yeah, with my kids, even Malachi and Sawyer can play it and do well. So it tells you, like, it's a very easy game to play. The skill level is not that you need to be some expert gamer to have fun in it. And so, like,
right.
Even my Malachi, who's 6, the other day, he's like, "Oh, Dad, I got a battle royale," which means he won. Out of the 100 players, he was the last one.
There you go.
And I'm like, I feel bad for all those people who don't know that they just got beat by a 6-year-old. Or when my daughter plays,
was that his birthday present?
Yeah, when my daughter plays, you could build structures as part of the game. You can build things. She's just over there fishing and building, and I looked.
That's
over,
not
like,
the point.
How did you eliminate 5 people when you're just over there with a fishing pole? And she's like,
"That's
I don't
so
know."
funny.
Just it's hilarious to me. But that's the appeal of the game, though. Is like anybody can pick it up and do it, and that's the same with a lot of video games, right? The appeal is, how broad of an audience can you get to use that?
Yeah, for sure. So, Josh, video games have been around pretty much all of our lives for sure, but kind of go through even before that some of the history of, how some of this video game thinking and technology got started.
Yeah. So let's go way back to like the 1940s.
Ooh, wow. Even before you were born.
Yeah, way back there. And so, early games were just, when you think of a video game nowadays, it's totally different. So back in the day, it was just some sort of interaction you could do using electronics. So, one of the earliest ones you can think of is tic-tac-toe. If they had a digital display to allow you to choose which section you were putting the tic-tac-toe in, and someone beside you could choose the X's and the O's, you could use, that would be a video game because you were using the video monitor as a way of, instead of a piece of paper. So way back in the early 40s, that was kind of what started it. And then over time, as TVs were developed and they had the tubes then, and there was the ability to hold more data, there was more advancements in this technology. But really,
so I'm going to go off on a tic-tac tangent.
Yes.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
So tic-tac-toe reminds me that when I was I was probably I was a sophomore or a junior in high school. I took my only chemistry class of my life, chemistry in high school, and it was horrible. And I did not like it, and I didn't understand it, and I didn't do that well in it. But anyway, I didn't want to pay attention because I didn't like it. So my friend, and if you're listening, Bryce Bumgardner, he and I sat across from each other in chemistry class and figured out exactly how many different options that you could have to win, and what you had to do to win, no matter who starts where, tic-tac-toe. Wow. We went through them all. And it was pretty intense. So I'll
like
play
you
you sometime.
Been doing that in a stat class instead.
That's
of
right.
class.
It's not chemistry. No wonder I didn't like it. But so Josh, next time I'm in your office with a whiteboard, we're going to play tic-tac-toe. You
know why you didn't like chemistry? You didn't look at that elements table enough. Yeah, because I was always told you need to look at it periodically.
Yeah, you periodically just doesn't cut it on the elements table.
Yeah. All right.
So flash forward a little bit from the 40s.
Is when it started. But again, it was just very basic. It was more just used as a screen or a way. There wasn't a lot of storage there. But in the 70s, the arcade games started coming out. So when you think of an arcade as a location you go to with a bunch of different things there. So that was in the early 70s is kind of where that popularity kicked in. They had their own kind of structures that the game itself was housed in. And then in 1972, Atari released the first commercially successful game. Can you guess what that was?
I think I've heard of my mom talking about it from back in the day. Pong, right?
Pong, yeah. So have you seen Pong?
It looks, yes, it's very archaic. It's archaic.
Archaic.
No, it's archaic.
I like
it. It's pretty old school looking.
Yeah,
like one joystick and maybe one button,
bounce
right?
things back and forth. It's just they sold over 19,000 of these little units, and they were separate. Like if you want to own Pong, you didn't buy a little cartridge like we do now and put it in a system. You bought the giant arcade cabinet to play it in. But that's where you started seeing them show up everywhere.
Yeah, I wanted to put a disclaimer out there for any listeners that think the audio quality might not be perfect or it might be breaking up. We are recording this remotely, so forgive any audio imperfections you hear, because I'm hearing some as we're recording it.
Yeah, and so after that, then those were in grocery stores and arcade places, and you had like these units were big, and then in the mid 70s you had video game consoles start to show up. Atari was one of them. Magnavox had another one. And so 1977, 1978 is when, again, when we think of technology, as things get cheaper, then there's a lot of innovation that happens. So as chips within these devices got cheaper, they had a huge innovation. And so there was a crash in the late 70s. Actually, Space Invaders came out right after this crash. So what happened was all the different people started making their version of Pong and selling them. And so there was just a saturation. And so eventually things just kind of crashed because there was just too much in the market. And then
because the cost of the components, the cost of those chips, and we talked about that in a different episode, they just dropped because they got so good and efficient at manufacturing them. The materials came down, probably tied somewhat to the oil crash in the early 70s.
Yes.
And that caused everything to get really cheap, and everyone wanted to make them, and then there was too many options where the whole industry just kind of tanked.
Yeah. So then we saw a bunch of businesses go out, and then Space Invaders came out. So Space Invaders kind of revitalized the gaming industry in that they were what is known as the first killer app. And what that means is just it's a game or an application that is so popular that it makes people buy the console to play it on. And so if I didn't own an Atari, when Space Invaders came out, I went out and bought the Atari system just so I could play the Space Invaders game. So they quadrupled the sales of the Atari system. Even though that system was 3 years old, people went out and quadrupled the sales when Space Invaders came out. So that kind of revitalized the gaming industry and brought about kind of this golden age, or the kind of the first golden age of gaming.
Probably similar to what you see, with when Halo came out.
Yes.
People probably were like, "Oh my goodness, I can't get this anywhere else. I need to buy an Xbox right now."
Yep.
When any of the Mario games, they're like, "I have to go buy a Nintendo 64. It just has to happen." So that's a great example. Thanks.
And so that went from the mid 1970s through the 1980s. In 1983, revenue for the gaming industry peaked at $3.2 billion in 1983 dollars. So it's like 18 million today or something like that. It's crazy. But $3.2 billion. Then it fell by 1985 to just 100 million. That's a 97% drop in revenue over 2 years.
That's
Again,
crazy.
It was oversaturation. There's some really crazy stories. So if you ever go and look up that kind of big drop in the video game industry in the 80s, there's a couple games that are kind of the example of this. In that E.T., the extraterrestrial, they came out with a game for that, and they rushed the development. They did it in 12 months or something like that, and the game was just horrible. And so there's rumors that they buried hundreds of thousands of these unsold games in a landfill because just no one bought them.
Really?
Yeah. And so there's just that. I mean, the whole thing fell apart. it was revitalized again when Nintendo came out with their Nintendo Entertainment System, the original Nintendo. And that was the first time that they really took modern kind of graphics, put it in a console, and then it had interchangeable games that were, just a lot better than what they had seen in the past. And that really revitalized.
And that was probably in the late 80s?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yep. And then from there, you really have three main players. You have Nintendo, you have Sega, which is around for a while, and then you have Sony, which is the PlayStation, and now you have the Xbox, which is Microsoft.
Wow.
And so, it went from, hundreds of different companies making their own things to now it's really narrowed down to there's really today just three. You have the Sony PlayStation, the Xbox, and the Nintendo. So that's really the three big players. Now, there's a fourth one, which is in PC gaming, which is a whole different one, which we'll talk a little bit about. But that's a whole different sector in that you're using your personal computer to play games on.
That is a crazy history of where we got to be today. And yeah, I think that having grown up in the video game era, as opposed to maybe our parents, it's kind of definitely changed the way that we interact with people more than it did back then. So it's definitely changed the economic landscape of, what people our age spent money on when they were growing up and through college and even today.
Well, and you talk about that, how you interact. So, when these original games came out, you would go to an arcade place to play them. And there was an interaction there with other people. And then it went to in-home where you're kind of isolated playing by yourself, or at most 2 or 3 or 4 other people in your room that connect to the same system.
Right.
And then we've since gone back to now you can play online and have multiple people you're playing with and communicate with them using microphones and speakers and stuff. So it really has changed over the years on who plays and how you play it. It's not just you by yourself like it was for a while.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a little bit, I think it's a lot more socially acceptable. You're not like a weirdo who, sits at home playing video games by yourself and doesn't have any friends now, because now your friends are on video games with you.
I saw a thing that said, in 2019, if you were unemployed and sat in your basement playing video games, you were a loser. In 2020, that's a responsible adult.
Yeah. Thanks, COVID.
With quarantine, that's the best thing to do is sit in the basement and play your video games away from everybody else.
Well, I've been watching Microsoft. We're going to talk more about investments in the space later, but I've been watching Microsoft stock obviously this whole year, and they have Xbox's, a large chunk of their business, and the numbers that they've seen through COVID, and people buying, not necessarily buying systems. Systems have been good, but people interacting online, user engagement, people buying things on their marketplace, all that stuff was hugely up in 2020, just due to the fact that for months, people were generally pretty much at home.
All right. So let's do a dad joke of the week. In fact, I got 2 dad jokes that are video game related.
Oh, right. Bring it.
Okay, here's the first one. What is a close talker's favorite video game? So there's people that just tend to be like really close talkers. They just like all up in your space.
I tend to avoid those people like the plague. But go ahead.
Their favorite video game is Space Invaders.
That's really funny.
Now I'm going to follow up with just a question. Do the French play video games?
Oui. See, I said that without even thinking what I was saying.
You realize it's the Nintendo.
It's a video game.
Yeah.
Okay, Josh, those are classics. Shows your dadness because you're qualified 4 times over. But let's talk a little bit more about kind of the scale of video games. So according to Wikipedia in 2018, so this is about a year and change old, video games in total generated sales of about $135 billion worldwide. Billion.
That's a lot.
135.
B with billion.
And that has not declined since that number came out. I would imagine that 2019 is higher and 2020 is going to be even higher. So there's this new term that really just became popular, within the last handful of years, and it's esports, right?
Yes.
So esports are electronic sports, or really video games where you're competing with one another competitively online. And there was a great article from smartasset.com that I'll link in the show notes, but had a couple cool points about this new area of video games. And it says, before COVID hit, the rise of competitive or even professional video gaming was here. But since then, and even before, dozens of leagues and 3 major governing bodies for video game competitions now exist across the world. And actually, the largest player and fan base is in South Korea, which is crazy to me. But they're just really all about that.
Well, isn't that where Samsung is?
It is, yes.
Maybe
Samsung is there, so
maybe they give everybody
a lot of their products. Yeah, a free phone. Maybe they're all gaming from the Samsung smartphones. Hey, you're a Samsung guy. Maybe you're part of that, Josh. So as video games and their companies have grown in size and profits, they've been able to invest in growing their games, becoming more immersive, more realistic, and this has allowed people to get realistic interactions, quote unquote, on a podcast here with air quotes, virtually, that they've never been able to have. So think of like sports games, racing games, shooting games. These are examples, or even like role-playing games. These are examples of things that you can't just go outside and do. Most people can't, and do it like well or do it safely or whatever. A lot of these things, there's a lot of risk, or you're just not going to be able to find a lightsaber in the real world where you can have one in a video game. So that is something that has made video games much more attractive over time, and really grown the area of esports, where people are like, hey, I can compete in this. I'm pretty good at this video game. And they just form groups, and these groups compete, and people literally make money. People make livings, 6 figures plus, playing video games professionally. That is crazy. So
the side market with that too is, not only do they make money playing video games, but they make money streaming them playing the games. So there's sites out there like Twitch and some other ones. Amazon actually has their own, I think, now too, where you can stream while you're playing and people can watch you play the game.
Yep. Yeah, and YouTube is huge for that too. There's a lot of YouTube, like professional video gamers that have YouTube channels that record them playing video games and what they've done, and millions of people watch this stuff.
Crazy.
So yeah, a lot of these professional gamers are not only making money through competitions on actual gaming and competitions where they actually compete with others, but they're putting their videos onto YouTube in other ways and then making money on that as well. It's just pretty crazy.
It's crazy.
And this trend was really exacerbated during the shutdown. So, 2 sports that I follow, and if you've listened to enough episodes, you've probably heard me talk about them, are MotoGP and Formula One. And during the shutdown, these sports that are all around the world, they weren't able to physically compete. So the professional racers, they had esports competitions, and they streamed those to keep the fans engaged while they were not actually able to race together. So it was pretty wild.
Were you able to race against them ever? Did they do anything like that where fans could race against them?
Well, so actually like Twitch is one example where there's this a lot of the younger racers are the ones that are into like sim racing on the side to stay sharp. And there's this one sim racer he's actually a Formula One racer for McLaren named Lando Norris. And he streams his racing on Twitch and stuff, but he actually, races with like a ton of just like normal people. You can join him in lobbies and stuff like that and race against this guy that you watch go 200 mile an hour on Sunday afternoon. So yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's just the fact that this is it's a viable source of income for people if you're really good at it. Now this
makes it harder as a parent when you tell your kids,
I know, to talk your kids out of it
and do something in real life because you can't make a living off that. Yes, I can.
They're like, but mom, I make 6 figures. So yeah, so that's crazy. So that's esports, and it's growing, and it's definitely a lot bigger than it ever has been. But I think one of the questions, and I know our listeners, one of the questions every single person is thinking in their head is, Austin, how can I invest in this trend, right?
Disclaimer.
I know, Josh, you're asking that. Now, the disclaimer is that this is none of this that I'm going to say is saying that these are great companies to invest in or great ETFs or whatever to invest in. Always talk with your financial advisor. They'll be able to tell you, if this kind of thing fits your financial plan and your goals. But here are some interesting ideas that I had read about and looked up. So first of all, some of these ideas came from a cool article from NASDAQ, which published an article talking about video games and investing in them. So you can invest in video games through video game publishing and creation companies, and a couple that come to mind are Electronic Arts, and the ticker is EA, and Activision Blizzard, which is one of their direct competitors. And these are some of the biggest companies that you can invest in. EA has the whole EA Sports line and stuff like that. So you've definitely seen products from these companies. Another way is through the technology or chip companies. So think of things like NVIDIA, which we've probably talked about on our podcast before. They make the graphics cards for PC gaming, which PC is a growing, huge industry. And if you really want to be a serious gamer, you game on a PC.
Yeah, because the idea there
you
is
just have way more power.
Your own platform and add or change the graphic cards and everything to your needs. Whereas when you buy a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One, you're set with whatever they put in there. Whereas a PC, you can make it yourself.
Yep. So that's what kind of those are like the standard for gaming graphics cards. But also things like Apple and Google have games on your phone or on your computer or whatever that you can play. So like Apple Arcade has you can get a subscription to play games on that. Google Stadia, I think is what it's called. You can get a subscription to play on that. It's kind of like a YouTube interface. It's really, really cool from what I've seen. I've not used it myself though. Also, actual computer chips from like Intel and stuff are going to be used to drive, gaming on PCs as well. Then you think of like the actual hardware companies that Josh has talked about before. Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo. Sony and Nintendo are not U.S. companies, but you can invest in them through ADRs here in the U.S. But Microsoft's one that's headquartered right here in the U.S., and they obviously have their Xbox. And Microsoft and Sony are launching their next generation of systems here at the end of 2020. And those are actually going to be, I think, coming out. I think I saw today, Black Friday, you'll be able to start getting some of these.
Yeah, they want them out before the holiday season, from what
exactly. And so there's the Xbox Series X and Series S, I think, are the ones that are launching at the same time. And the Xbox Series X is the big bad one. And then there's the PlayStation 5. So
real quick, so your PlayStation
consoles.
PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. Then you had the Xbox.
Yeah, makes sense, right?
Xbox 360. Yep. Then you go back to the Xbox One. Then you go to the Xbox X. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't really plan that one out. And then you've got Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Nintendo GameCube, Nintendo Wii, Nintendo Switch. Yeah. So PlayStation makes the most sense to me as a numbers guy, the way that they've named things.
Yes.
So anyway, those are some opportunities in individual companies. There's also some thematic ETFs that are interesting. And Josh, because you have a thing for tickers.
So wait a minute.
You're going to like
ETFs.
These.
Thematic ETFs.
Yes.
So that's like they're in drama class, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah, they're really dramatic. No, actually, they invest. These ETFs are focused on companies with a theme.
Okay.
So thematic. So one of those is the ETF MG. That's the company. Video Game Tech ETF. Makes sense.
What's the ticker?
GAMR.
Gamer.
Nice. So Josh has a thing for investing in things with cool tickers, and there's one for you.
It's like the Dow
another
theory,
one is the
but
VanEck.
it's just spelled right.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's the VanEck Vectors Video Gaming and Esports ETF. And that is ticker ESPO. So that's like esports. So kind of some cool ETFs. So Josh, the question is, as a financial advisor, should you own video game companies?
Yeah. So like I always say, and it's probably, I could just record this answer for every episode we get into these things, is it really depends, right? It depends on your goals, your priorities, your risk tolerance. But in general, a diversified portfolio, if you're talking equities, probably will hold something in this sector because of its, impact on society. It's a piece of society that, when we talk about computers and chips and all that, that's part of a growing trend in technology. So should you own this? My guess is in a diversified portfolio, you probably already do. But if there's something that you're passionate about, I always say, investing things you're passionate about is just another indicator. If you're passionate about it and other people are as well, it tends to be a long-term good investment. But again, you really need to talk with your advisor, make sure it fits with your plan and your strategy.
And yeah, like Josh was saying, if you are invested in something that's already kind of diversified, so I think like a big mutual fund that's kind of passive and holds what the market holds, or S&P 500 ETF, you're already holding Apple and Google and Microsoft significantly. So you have some exposure to this trend already. Now, if you want to go above and beyond that in, something more specific, that is totally an option as well. But yeah, talk to your advisor. So Josh, the question is, what video games did you grow up playing? Did you play in college? Do you play now? Do you play anything? Or I don't know. What do you got going on?
Good question.
Maybe you just read books and you're one of those people that everyone wants to be.
I actually do tic-tac-toe on paper is all I do.
That's it.
But really, growing up, I remember two things. The first video game system we ever owned or bought was the original Nintendo. And we played that. I have 4 siblings, so the 5 of us, and we had one system. We would play together, have a lot of fun. But we also, I remember as a kid, had, I'm guessing it was my uncle's old Atari, which was really neat to just plug in every once in a while and play like the old games from like the 80s and this late 70s. You talk about the Space Invader and those things. So that was a fun one to do as a kid because it was something different. Felt like it was, retro and old school. But
back then it was retro.
It was. It's even more so now. But then heading into college, Halo was big. And so we, as guys in college, we played a lot of Halo and Call of Duty. We did a couple other, things, but Xbox and Xbox 360 were the things that I did in college. And then now I've matured and the majority of my time is spent playing with my kids. And so depending on what mood they're in, I still have my Xbox 360 from college. And so we have some more Lego oriented games. So like Lego Harry Potter, Lego Star Wars, those type of things. And so they like those games are pretty fun and pretty tame for kids. And then like I mentioned, my older kids love Fortnite, and I will play that with them every once in a while.
Gotcha.
What about you, Austin?
Yeah, so growing up I was getting into a video game age in the sort of late 90s. And the late 90s, the big bad boy on the block was the Nintendo 64. So my parents got us a Nintendo 64, the green version with the special red chip. I forget what that's called, that allows you to play things like Donkey Kong. So, and a lot of controllers and games and stuff like that. So we had a Nintendo 64. I have played GoldenEye in my older ages, but I was not allowed, and we did not own it when I was actually, like 9. So, but I have since played it, and I still have our Nintendo 64 at my house now with an adapter so I can play it on my big TV, but I should grab that game on eBay. So anyway, my mom, so when she got us this system when we were kids, she would stay up, unwrap it every night before they gave it to us for Christmas, and plug it in and play it after we all went to bed, and then rewrap it, put it back in the box until the next day, until she actually gave it to us. She was obsessed with Donkey Kong.
That's hilarious.
Oh my goodness. It was hilarious. And so if you think of Donkey Kong 64, you can actually like swing from tree to tree. And when my mom, I can still picture her doing this, she would have the controller in her hand and she would like swing with the monkey as she went. And it was so funny.
I feel like that's the thing with parents. Like, it seems like their hand coordination has to involve a lot of movement.
It's more physical
when they're trying to make you jump and run or whatever.
Right. So I started with that, and then they got us a Nintendo GameCube when we were a little bit older, once that came out. And that was a lot of fun. My brother and I would play Super Smash Brothers Melee until forever. I mean, that was the best game on their period. So that was a lot of fun. And then I got a free Xbox 360 because it had Red Ring of Death from my friend. Yep. And I was able to fix it, which don't ask me how I did it. It was crazy. And it involved putting some pennies in it and wrapping it in a blanket to let things melt together. And it worked for years. And then, so I had that into college. And obviously in college, things were like Call of Duty was huge. Mm-hmm. We played a lot of Madden and sports games. And I was always into racing games, so like Forza. But then I actually sold it and did not have video games for years until I think it was about a year ago. My wife surprised me and got me an Xbox One for my birthday. And nice. Since then I have an Xbox One, and I think I only have racing games for it, but I have like a full racing seat and steering wheel and stuff like that, so I can actually do some sim racing on it. So it's kind of fun. I don't really have a ton of time for it.
That would explain why you're really good at parallel parking. You probably have like a game that tells you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Hey, nowadays you don't even need to be good at parallel parking. You can just push a button and your car will do it for you.
Well, maybe it's like an actual sim. Like, no, it's not automated, but there's like some person in a video game that whenever
they're doing it for you,
the button, they do it for you. So it's like it's a secret of the industry.
There's like a data center with just drivers sitting in it in like India or somewhere. That'd be really funny. So anyway, that is video games. It is definitely a growing industry. It's something that's constantly changing, and it is something that you could legitimately make money at, or you can legitimately spend money at. But either way, it's a big chunk of our economy, much bigger than it used to be. And it's what the cool kids are doing now. It's not what the nerds are doing, right?
That's right. That's what I say because I play them. It's got
That's
all the cool people are playing them.
So I guess this is just a reminder that, as always, check out our free gift to you. It's a brief list of 8 principles of timeless investing. It's on our website. These are overarching investment themes meant to keep you on track to meet your long-term goals. Check that out. Josh, how can people help us grow this podcast?
Yep. Like always, if you love our episodes, make sure you subscribe. That way you get an alert every Thursday when we bring a new episode out. If you are on the Apple Podcast, leave us a review that helps us rank higher so more people will find us in the searches. And then if you have any topics like today, which was a shout out to actually my wife, Stephanie, is the one that came up with this idea. So we love doing topics. If someone says, this is something I always wondered about, shoot us an email at hello@theinvesteddads.com. And we'd love to talk about whatever you're thinking is interesting. Also, if you know somebody that's into video games and you think they'd like to hear this, make sure you share this episode with them.
All right. Well, until next Thursday, have a great week.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Invested Dads podcast. This episode has ended, but your journey towards a better financial future doesn't have to. Head over to theinvesteddads.com to access all the links and resources mentioned in today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and we had a positive impact on your life, leave us a review, click subscribe, and don't miss the next episode. Josh Robb and Austin Wilson work for Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Josh, Austin, or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. There is no guarantee that the statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. Securities investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment plan or strategy will be successful.